Hello, YouTube. Robert Ludwigovich Bartini, Italian-born Soviet aircraft designer, was a visionary who had an unusual mind and character. It seemed that he was not from this time, definitely not from his time, but from some other era. Someone even called him an alien. Without a doubt, Bartini has left quite a mark in Soviet aircraft building. However, he became famous mainly for his ideas and concepts, and only a few of those actually became reality. He was definitely ahead of his time. I already presented a video about the invisible aircraft designed and built in the USSR in the 1930s. You can find the link to this video in the description to this one. Please do not miss watching it so you can learn about one of the most interesting, fascinating, intelligent beings of the 20th century, like Ivan Yefremov. He was suspected of being an extraterrestrial. Whoever he was, his understanding of the universe was strikingly different from most Homo sapiens. There was another strange aircraft that Bartini designed. The only surviving prototype of this unusual aircraft now sits basically dilapidated in a field not far from Moscow, but it was once the hope of the Soviet Union against the US submarine attacks. At least this is the view of the Americans. The Bartini-Beriev VVA-14, the letters basically are an acronym for the vertical takeoff amphibious aircraft, and 14 was the number of the engine. This aircraft was designed to take off from anywhere without a runway and to be capable of sustained flight just above the water surface. The Russians state its purpose this way. The idea of creating a VVA-14 aircraft arose in the early 1960s. At that time, the Soviet Union needed a new type of aircraft that could replace outdated models. That is why it was decided to develop a vertical takeoff and landing, VVA, for the transportation of cargo and passengers. The VVA-14 was designed to fly at high altitudes and be able to take off and land vertically. Its main advantage was that it could be used at small airfields, which made it ideal for transporting cargo and passengers to remote areas, which is important in a country like the Soviet Union, huge country with hard-to-reach areas. And I describe such areas in my videos. The Americans state its purpose differently. Designed in the 1960s, the aircraft was a response to the United States Polaris ballistic missiles. The United States introduced them in 1961 and their submarine fleet as part of its nuclear deterrent. In the mind of its designer, Robert Bartini, the amphibious VVA-14 would be the perfect machine to seek and destroy the missile-carrying submarines. The plan, however, did not work out. Only two of the proposed three prototypes were built, and only one was ever flown. And when Bartini died in 1974, the project died with him, and the second prototype was dismantled. By the way, Bartini was a very classified person in the Soviet Union, and it took years to find out who he was. Towards the end of the demise of the Soviet Union, maybe in the next few years, that's when people really find out. The Russians see it this way. Despite all its potential capabilities, the VVA-14 never went into mass production. The reason for this was the complexity of the design of the aircraft, as well as the lack of technologies necessary for its production. The first prototype, mostly intact, was sent in 1987 to the Central Air Force Museum near Moscow, but there was some problem with the delivery. The aircraft was damaged, and it has not been repaired since. The 14 was a flying boat that was supposed to take off from water or land vertically, like I said, and fly like a regular aircraft at altitude. So Bartini left his home in Italy for the Soviet Union in 1923, after the rise of the Italian fascist party and their coming to power. He had envisaged several different types of the VVA-14, including one with inflatable pontoons to land on water, and another one with folding wings that could be operated from ships at sea. And the first prototype took to the air in 1972. It was later fitted with pontoons and it was tested afloat. The aircraft did not have lifting engines or any equipment for to search for submarines. It was intended only for studying the characteristics of horizontal flight and testing the aircraft systems, according to the Russians. In total, from 1972 to 1975, it performed 107 flights with over 103 flight hours. The strange looks that it had for the aircraft basically gave it the nickname of Zmei Gorыныch. This is a legendary dragon from the Russian folk tales, basically a description of ancient dinosaur, but multi-headed. When looking at it from the ground, the VVA-14 caused people, understandably, to associate it with Zmei Gorыныch, because the aircraft also had 3 heads, so to say, and relatively small wings. There are legendary aircraft in the world of aviation that have become real icons in their field. One of these aircraft is the VVA-14. This aircraft, despite its uniqueness and potential, could not really take off into the sky. More precisely, test flights were conducted, but the aircraft did not go into mass production. Therefore, the VVA-14 prototype remains rusting on the ground. One of the experts in the field of aviation is Professor John Johnson. The Russians say that he claims that the VVA-14 aircraft was created so unique and complex that it can only be compared with a rocket. However, in his opinion, modern technologies make it possible to create a more efficient and easy-to-use aircraft that can replace the VVA-14. So, as a result, the VVA-14 remains one of the most unique and mysterious aircraft in the history of aviation. Despite the fact that it has never been put into mass production, its design and potential capabilities continue to attract the attention of scientists and aviation experts from around the world. Little known to the general public, Robert Bartini was not only an outstanding scientist and aviation designer, but also one of the secret inspirers of the Soviet space program. You have to imagine now, some people, and those in the know, claim that he was an extraterrestrial. And here, he was one of the people who inspired the Soviet space program. Formidable, at least in the beginning. Known to all, Sergei Pavlovich Korolev, father of the Soviet space exploration, called Bartini his teacher. Many other well-known Soviet aircraft designers also consider him to be as such. In different years, Bartini was associated with Yakovlev, Ilyushin, Antonov, Mesishev, and many others. In total, on the account of this designer, there were more than 60 completed aircraft projects, all of which were distinguished by special originality and novelty of ideas. In addition to aviation and physics, Bartini was quite involved in philosophy and cosmology. He developed a unique theory of the 6-dimensional world in which time, like the space surrounding us, possessed 3 dimensions. This theory of his was known as the world of Bartini. The biography of Robert Bartini is truly amazing. His real name is Roberto Oros di Bartini, hereditary Italian aristocrat born in the family of the Baron in May of 1897 in Fiurna in Austro-Hungary. In 1916, Bartini ends an officer's school and goes to the Eastern Front, where he is captured during the Brusilov Russian army breakthrough and sent to a prisoner of war camp near Khabarovsk in the Far East, and where he is supposed to be absorbed by the ideas of Bolshevism, Soviet communism. In 1920, Roberto returns to his homeland. By this time, his father had already retired and settled in Rome, while retaining many of the privileges and title of the state advisor. But his son refuses to use his father's opportunities, including financial ones. He goes to work at the Isotta Fraschini plant in Milan, and at the same time takes an external exam in the aviation department of the Milan Polytechnic Institute and receives a diploma from an aeronautical engineering. At about the same time in 1921, he joined the Italian Communist Party. After the fascist coup in Italy in 1923, Roberto Bartini, by the decision of the Italian Communist Party, is sent to the USSR to help the country in the field of aircraft manufacturing. So began the Soviet stage in his life, in the life of the Red Baron, as was the nickname that Bartini received in the Soviet Union. Roberto Bartini's Soviet career originates at the scientific experimental, now Chkalovsky airfield, where he served as the department head and chief engineer. I will just go through some stages of his life, which was very full in the Soviet Union, but try to underline some of the most important. In 1928, Bartili led the experimental group which was engaged in the design of seaplanes. Working in this group, he proposed the design of the experimental Steel 6 fighter and the MTB 42-ton marine bomber. However, in 1930, his group was included in the Central Design Bureau, from where Bartini was fired for criticizing the organization that was being created. In the same year, on the recommendation of the Soviet military leader, Marshal Tukhachevsky, Bartini was appointed chief designer for the Design Bureau of the Civil Air Research Institute Fleet. Acquaintance and protection of Tukhachevsky later will play a cruel joke with the designer. So, in February of 1938, Bartini was arrested. He was charged in connection with the enemy of the people, Marshal Tukhachevsky, as well as spying for Mussolini, despite the fact that he had fled to the USSR from his regime. By decision of the extrajudicial body, the so-called Troika, Robert Bartini was sentenced to the typical 10 years of imprisonment and 5 years imprisoned, meaning defeat of rights. He could not have rights 5 years also afterwards. The prisoner Bartini was sent to the prison type CKB 29 prison. Such design offices or places, sites in the USSR were called the Sharashkas. Basically, that's where they kept science slaves, scientists who were used as slaves for the state without paying them anything, of course. They were lucky to be alive. While imprisoned, he actively participated in the creation of the new two bomber. At his own request, he was transferred to a group of prisoners of the Tomashevich Bureau 101, which was engaged in the design of a fighter. It played a trick on him. In 1941, everyone who worked together with the designer Tupolev was released, while the employees of the 101 Bureau were freed only after the war. Already at the beginning of the war, a special Bartini Design Bureau was organized, which worked on two projects. Anyway, in the year 1948, Robert Bartini was released, and he works in 1952 already works for that year in the Beriev Design Bureau for the Aviation Administration. In 1956, Bartini was rehabilitated. Basically, he was reinstated, and whatever he was accused of was determined to be untrue. In 1968, the team of Robert Bartini from Moscow region moved to the Dimitrov plant in Taganrog, and this factory or plant or works specialized in seaplanes. Here in the Beriev Design Bureau, work is underway on the concept of the non-airfield aircraft. In 1972, two anti-submarine aircraft VVA-14 vertically flying amphibians were built there. Work on this project was the last in the life of Bartini. In 1974, he died at the age of 77, leaving behind him more than 60 original aircraft designs. For 51 years, Robert Bartini lived in the USSR, almost 45 of which he spent working as a chief designer. Thousands of domestic specialists, experts, worked with him, not for him, because he invariably corrected everyone who ever made such a statement that they worked for him. Ministers, directors, academicians, head of workshops and departments, ordinary designers, mechanics, copiers, pilots. He treated everyone with equal respect, as he did with his colleagues in the common cause. Whoever he was, an alien or a very gifted human, Robert Bartini left behind very interesting legacy, and I am not sure if we have full information available to general public even today. But you can watch my other videos too to learn a few other things. Thank you for your attention to my work. If you can support my research, please do so through the links you will find in the description to this video. Please tell others about my channel. Please like my videos.